I thought I was being the perfect brother, letting my sister and her husband move in during their hard times. Little did I know, that act of kindness would lead to the biggest betrayal of my life. It began just like any other day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Lily was in the kitchen, whipping up breakfast as usual, expertly scrambling eggs and flipping bacon, playing the role of the perfect wife. Meanwhile, David, my sister's husband, sat at the dining table, eyes glued to his phone, completely unaware, or at least, that's what I thought back then. Little did I know that a storm was already brewing right under my nose. You see, my younger sister Mary and David had been going through some serious financial struggles. Mary was usually great with managing their money, but when David's business went belly up, it dragged both of them into a deep hole. It didn't take long for them to start falling behind on their mortgage. With nowhere else to turn, I did what any decent brother would do, I let them move in with us until they could get back on their feet. Looking back now, I realize that might have been the biggest mistake I ever made. At first, things seemed alright. Sure, it was a bit crowded, but I figured it was just a temporary situation. I didn't mind playing the role of the hero, the guy who could offer a lifeline to family in their time of need. We even joked about it. Lily used to say we were just one big happy family. It's like we're back in college, housemates and all, she'd say with that sly smile of hers, and I'd laugh it off. I had no clue how those words would come back to haunt me, in the worst way possible. You don't just wake up one morning and suddenly know your wife's been cheating on you. No, it creeps up on you, starting off small, almost invisible. It's like a slow leak in the ceiling. At first, you don't even notice the stain. By the time you do, the damage has already been done. There were little signs here and there. Lily began dressing up more, putting on makeup even if we had nowhere to go. She started laughing a bit too hard at David's corny jokes. But I brushed it off, assuming she was just trying to lighten the mood with all the stress Mary and David were dealing with. I didn't think much of it. One evening, we were all hanging out in the living room. I was flipping through TV channels while Lily and David were over at the kitchen island, chatting and laughing. I glanced over and noticed how close they were standing. Lily leaned in, a little more than usual, her hand brushing against David's arm as she laughed at whatever nonsense he was saying. It didn't sit right with me, but I shrugged it off. I mean, who in their right mind would suspect their own wife and brother-in-law of messing around behind their back? It's too insane to even consider. The bombshell didn't drop until that family vacation we went on. It was supposed to be a break from all the stress, just a few days up at the lake in a cabin I'd rented for everyone. I thought some fresh air and time away from the city might help Mary and David forget about their money problems, at least for a little while. Plus, I figured it would be a good opportunity for Lily and me to reconnect. Our marriage hadn't been bad exactly, but lately, something just felt off. I chalked it up to the stress of having 2 extra people living under our roof. Never once did it cross my mind that there might be something else, something far more sinister. We arrived at the cabin that Friday afternoon. The air was cool and crisp, the lake perfectly still, mirroring the dense forest around it. It was the kind of place you'd think could heal old wounds, bring people closer together. But for me, it would soon become the place where my entire world came crashing down. The first couple of days went by without any drama. We spent our time fishing, hiking, and making s'mores around the campfire, exactly what you'd expect from a family getaway. But on the third night, after a long day of hiking, things took a turn. We were all gathered by the fire, sipping beer and sharing old stories. That's when I noticed something strange about Lily. She kept sneaking glances at David, their eyes meeting in quick, almost secretive exchanges. Mary was right beside me, laughing at some ridiculous story I was telling, completely unaware. But my mind wasn't on her, I was too busy trying to figure out why Lily was acting so damn weird. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself wide awake. Something inside me just wouldn't let me rest, an uneasy feeling gnawing away at me. I decided to get up, thinking some fresh air might clear my head. As I grabbed my jacket, I realized Lily wasn't in bed. Probably went to the bathroom, I thought. But when I checked, the bathroom was empty. That's when I saw it, a faint light glowing from the boathouse down by the lake. I didn't think much of it at first, but something made me grab a flashlight and head that way. Maybe it was the way Lily had been acting earlier, or maybe my gut was telling me something was off. Either way, I had to find out what was going on. I walked quietly along the path, the crunch of leaves under my boots the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. As I approached the boathouse, I began to hear muffled voices. One of them was Lily's. I slowed down, my heart hammering against my ribs, and cautiously peeked through the small window on the side of the boathouse. What I saw hit me like a punch to the gut. There they were, Lily and David, wrapped up in each other's arms, kissing like they couldn't get enough. Her shirt was gone, and his hands were all over her, touching her in ways only I had the right to. I stood there, frozen. I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe. In that one awful moment, my entire world crumbled. The woman I had trusted more than anyone was betraying me right in front of my eyes, and with David, of all people. My sister's husband. The same man I had welcomed into my home when he needed help. I wanted to burst in there, grab David by the throat, and scream at Lily until my lungs gave out. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and made my way back to the cabin as if nothing had happened. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I had just witnessed, but I couldn't make any sense of it. When Lily sneaked back into the cabin an hour later, pretending like everything was fine, I couldn't even look at her. She slid into bed beside me, her skin still warm from her little tryst with David, while I just lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling. The next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't about to confront them, not right away. No, I wanted them to experience the same kind of pain I was feeling. I wanted them to suffer, but I needed to be smart about how I went about it. And that's when I started thinking about Mary. Sweet, innocent Mary. She didn't deserve any of this, just like I didn't. But if I was going to take down Lily and David, I figured Mary might as well be dragged into the mess. Fairness went out the window the second I saw Lily all over David. At first, I wrestled with the idea. Mary was my sister, for God's sake. But the more I mulled it over, the more it made sense. If Lily could betray me with my sister's husband, then why shouldn't I do the same to her? Why shouldn't I take from her the very thing she had stolen from me? I started off slow. It was all innocent at first, longer looks, lingering touches, nothing too blatant but just enough to plant the idea in Mary's head. She was vulnerable, worried about David, their finances, and what the future held. It made her easy to manipulate, and I knew just how to play my cards. We began having late-night drinks together, once Lily and David had gone off to bed. We'd sit out on the porch, talking about life, about how rough things had gotten. She poured out her worries to me, and I played the role of the caring older brother. But deep down, I had a much different plan in mind. The late-night drinks with Mary quickly became our little routine. It was almost too easy. David and Lily were so absorbed in their own affair that they never noticed when Mary and I slipped out to the porch after dinner. It turned into our escape, a place where we could talk and share our struggles, or at least, that's what Mary believed. For her, it was a safe space, a chance to let out the frustration over how much strain David's failures had put on their marriage. She confided in me about how distant he'd grown, how she felt like she was slowly losing him. I listened intently, playing the part of the concerned brother, nodding at all the right moments, offering my shoulder for her to cry on. But inside, I was boiling over. Every time she mentioned David, all I could think about was how he was fooling around with my wife, all while pretending to be some decent guy in need of a break. The first time it happened, it was almost by accident. We were sitting on the porch, the cool night air making the hair on our arms stand up. Mary had had one too many glasses of wine, and her speech was starting to slur a bit. She leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder, letting out a deep, weary sigh. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Mark," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I'm just so damn tired." In that instant, something inside me snapped. A surge of anger rushed through me, this overwhelming urge to reclaim some control over the disaster my life had become. I didn't even think, I just leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic, it was hard, filled with all the rage and frustration that had been festering inside me since I caught Lily and David together. Mary pulled back for a brief second, her eyes wide with shock. "Mark, what are you?" she started to say, but then she paused. Her expression softened, and before I knew it, she was kissing me back. It was wrong, there were so many reasons it was wrong, but in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. It wasn't about love, or tenderness, or anything close to that. It was about power. About reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. Mary was fragile, confused, and looking for comfort, for something that made her feel wanted again. And I took advantage of that. I used her. Things escalated fast after that. One night turned into 2, then 3, and soon enough, we were sneaking around like teenagers, waiting for those perfect moments when no one else was around. I'd never experienced anything quite like it, not even with Lily. It wasn't just the thrill of doing something forbidden, although that certainly added to it. It was the satisfaction of feeling like I was getting my revenge, piece by piece. Every time Mary whispered my name, every time she reached for me in the dark, it felt like I was clawing back what was mine. But it wasn't that simple. The deeper I sank into this mess, the more complicated everything became. Mary wasn't just some pawn in my revenge scheme, she was my sister. And despite everything, I did care about her. There were fleeting moments when guilt crept in, whispering that maybe I was crossing a line. But then I'd catch a glimpse of Lily and David together, laughing as if they hadn't betrayed me, and that guilt would vanish. I reminded myself that they deserved this. They had made their choices, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. One evening, while Lily and David were out grabbing groceries, Mary and I found ourselves alone in the house. The tension between us had been building for days, and it finally reached a breaking point. We didn't even make it to the bedroom. Instead, we ended up in the living room, ripping at each other's clothes like animals. It was fast, frantic, almost violent. There was no love in it, no tenderness, just raw, desperate need fueled by anger and betrayal. And when it was over, we lay there on the floor, both of us breathing heavily, the silence between us so thick it was suffocating. I glanced over at Mary, her face was flushed, hair disheveled. For the first time, I really saw her for what she was, just another victim in this whole mess. She had no clue about the real situation, no idea that her husband was sleeping with my wife right under her nose. And here I was, using her as a pawn to get back at them. A wave of guilt washed over me, but I shoved it aside. There was no room for guilt anymore, not in this game. As the days passed, I knew I had to tread carefully. Lily and David were getting reckless, sneaking around with less caution, probably feeling like they had everyone duped. But I wasn't a fool. I knew it was only a matter of time before one of them slipped up, and when that happened, I'd be ready to strike. Around that time, I began planting the seeds for my bigger plan. I realized I couldn't keep this affair with Mary going indefinitely without it eventually blowing up in my face. Sooner or later, someone was bound to find out, and it would be a catastrophe. So, I started laying the groundwork for the final blow, the family dinner. Orchestrating this wasn't simple. Getting everyone in the same room was easy enough since we all lived under the same roof, but I needed the timing to be perfect. I wanted to ensure that when the truth came out, it would land like a sledgehammer. No one would walk away from this unscathed, not Lily, not David, and certainly not Mary. I began gathering evidence, texts, emails, photos, anything that could prove beyond any doubt that Lily and David were having an affair. It wasn't difficult. They were careless, leaving their phones unlocked, sending messages when they thought no one was paying attention. I took screenshots, saved photos, even recorded a few of their phone conversations. I had all the ammunition I needed. But that alone wasn't enough. I wanted this to cut deep, to make it personal. I wanted them to feel the same humiliation I experienced that night in the boathouse. So, I dug into David's past. It turns out he wasn't just a lousy husband. He had been cheating on Mary long before Lily entered the picture. There were old messages, hidden accounts, even some sketchy business dealings he'd been involved in. It was perfect. I wasn't just going to ruin his marriage, I was aiming to obliterate his entire life. The night of the family dinner finally arrived. I had everything set up exactly how I wanted. The projector was ready, the photos and texts were queued up, all just waiting for the right moment. We gathered around the table, Lily, smiling like the picture-perfect wife, David, acting like a clown, cracking jokes as if he weren't a complete piece of trash, and Mary, sitting there blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. I sat there watching them, my heart racing in my chest, knowing that in just a few moments, everything would change. The lies, the betrayal, the anger, it was all about to spill out, and there'd be no turning back. But that was exactly what I wanted. There was no room for second thoughts now. That evening, I could barely hold myself together. My hands shook as I set the table, and I think Mary noticed. She gave me a sweet, concerned look, like she had absolutely no idea what was coming. And she didn't, not really. None of them had a clue. Lily, as usual, played the role of the perfect wife, smiling, offering everyone more wine, doing her best impression of a gracious hostess. If only they knew the truth. David sat directly across from her, acting like his usual smartass self, making everyone laugh as if he hadn't been sneaking around with my wife for who knows how long. What really got to me was the way they interacted, the little glances, the subtle touches. They thought they were so clever, so discreet, but I saw it all. And I wasn't about to let them get away with it any longer. I had everything prepped, my laptop connected to the projector, hidden discreetly in the corner of the room. Just one click, and their whole world would come crashing down. I kept checking the clock, waiting for the perfect moment. Timing was everything. Dinner dragged on, with everyone chatting about work, the kids, and family matters. Mary seemed happier than I'd seen her in a long time, completely oblivious to how her life was about to be ripped apart. Part of me almost wanted to call the whole thing off, she didn't deserve this, after all. But then I thought about all the lies, the sneaking around, and those nights I spent wide awake, knowing my wife was sleeping with my sister's husband. No, they deserved this. Every single one of them. Dessert came out, and I knew it was time. My heart was racing, but I forced my voice to stay steady as I cleared my throat. I've got a little surprise for everyone, I announced, doing my best to sound casual. The room went silent, and everyone turned to look at me, curious. I've been working on something, and I figured tonight would be the perfect time to share it. Lily gave me a clueless smile, but I caught a flicker of concern in David's eyes. He knew something was off. He wasn't completely brainless, after all. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. One tap, and it would all be over. "Mark, what's this about?" Lily asked, trying to keep her voice light, but I could hear the tension creeping in underneath. She wasn't fooling anyone. I met her gaze, staring straight into her eyes. "You'll find out soon enough," I replied, my voice cold. And then I pressed the button. The room went dark for a second, and then the projector flickered to life. At first, a still image appeared on the wall, a text conversation between Lily and David. They were exchanging messages about how they couldn't wait to sneak off together again, scheming to find excuses during the vacation. It was explicit, shameless. Just reading it made my blood boil. I heard Mary gasp, the sound of her fork clattering onto her plate. Lily's face went ghostly pale, her eyes wide with shock. "What is this, Mark?" she hissed, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I just let the images continue to roll, message after message, photo after photo. Pictures of them sneaking off together, their hands all over each other. And then came the video, the one from the boathouse, where I'd caught them red-handed. I'd recorded it from outside, hidden behind the door. The quality wasn't great, but it was more than enough. Enough to show exactly what they were doing. Enough to destroy them. Mary let out a choked sob, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "Oh my God, David," she cried, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. She turned to him, looking completely shattered. "How could you?" David sat there, frozen, his face drained of all color. He looked like he was about to be sick. "Mary, I can explain," he stammered, but didn't even finish the sentence. He knew there was no explaining his way out of this. Lily, on the other hand, wasn't going down quietly. She whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. "You set this all up, didn't you? You sick bastard," she screamed, standing so quickly that her chair toppled over. "How long have you known? How long have you been planning this?" I stood my ground, watching her unravel in front of me. "Long enough," I replied quietly. "Long enough to see exactly what kind of person you really are." Lily lunged at me, her hands balled into fists. "You're a monster," she shrieked, and I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Me, a monster? This coming from the woman who'd been sneaking around with my brother-in-law right under my nose. David still sat there, motionless, his eyes glued to the screen in horror. He hadn't moved a muscle, and I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "David," Mary's voice broke again, and when he didn't respond, she grabbed the glass of wine in front of her and hurled it straight across the table at him. It shattered against his chest, red wine soaking through his shirt. That finally snapped him out of his daze. "Mary, please," he begged, struggling to stand, but his legs wobbled like they could barely support him. But she wasn't hearing any of it, she was too busy sobbing, her whole body shaking with grief. I felt a stab of guilt then, watching my sister fall apart like that, but I buried it deep. This needed to happen. They all had to face the consequences of their actions. Lily was still screaming at me, calling me every name she could think of, accusing me of being a psychopath, of manipulating everything. But I didn't care. I just stood there, letting her words bounce off me, feeling an odd sense of satisfaction as everything unraveled around us. This was what I had wanted, total destruction. Mary got to her feet, trembling, her face flushed and blotchy from crying. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you," she screamed at David, her voice cracking. "How could you do this to me? To us?" She was crying so hard I thought she might collapse right then and there. "You've ruined everything." David, looking ghostly pale and shaking, tried to move closer to her, but she stepped back, holding up her hands as if she couldn't bear the thought of being near him. "Don't. Just don't," she sobbed, turning away. "We're done, David. It's over." And just like that, I watched as David's life crumbled before him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Lily stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. Moments later, I heard her car screeching out of the driveway. David left soon after, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Suddenly, the house was engulfed in silence, except for the soft sound of Mary's crying. I walked over to her, trying to put a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched, recoiling from my touch. "Don't," she whispered, her voice raw. "Just don't, Mark. I can't. Not right now." I nodded, feeling a tightness in my throat. "I'm sorry, Mary," I said, and I meant every word. But apologies wouldn't fix anything. It didn't change the fact that I'd just torn our family apart. She didn't respond, just stood there for what felt like forever, sobbing quietly. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. I heard the front door close softly behind her, leaving me alone amidst the wreckage I'd caused. That sense of satisfaction I thought I'd feel. It was nowhere to be found. Instead, all I felt was emptiness. Hollow. Sure, I got my revenge. I tore Lily and David's world apart, just as I'd planned. But now what? Where did that leave me? I slumped down at the table, staring at the shards of broken glass and the wine stains on the tablecloth, questioning if I'd gone too far. But it didn't really matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. The next few days after that disastrous dinner passed in a blur. Lily never came home that night, and to be honest, I couldn't have cared less where she went. I wasn't thinking about her, not really. My mind was stuck on Mary, how shattered she had looked as everything unraveled, how she had flinched away from me like I was part of the problem. Maybe I was. I had wanted revenge, and I got it. But now I was left standing in the aftermath, with no clue of what to do next. I sat at home, alone, replaying everything in my mind over and over again. The way Lily had screamed at me. The glass shattering. The sheer devastation on Mary's face as she realized what her husband had done. And through it all, I couldn't shake this gnawing sense of guilt. Sure, David and Lily deserved every bit of it. They had it coming. But Mary didn't. I had dragged her into this, used her as a pawn in my twisted plan for revenge, and now she was paying the price. That was never supposed to be part of the plan. Lily didn't come back for 2 more days. When she finally did, the silence between us was suffocating. She didn't say a single word to me, didn't even glance in my direction. She just grabbed a few things, some clothes, her makeup bag, and stormed out again, slamming the door behind her like a final screw you. I let her go. She wasn't my concern anymore. Mary, though, Mary was a different story altogether. I tried calling her the next day, but she didn't answer. My texts went ignored. I even stopped by her place, but she wasn't there. She had retreated into her shell, shutting everyone out as she tried to make sense of the wreckage that had become her life. I couldn't blame her. I wasn't exactly eager to confront what I had done either. Then, one night, about a week after the dinner, I heard a knock on my door. It was late, well past midnight, and the last thing I expected was to find Mary standing there. Her eyes were swollen and red, like she'd been crying for days. She looked like hell, but I knew I didn't look much better. We just stood there, staring at each other for a long moment before she finally spoke. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. I nodded and stepped aside, letting her enter without saying a word. She walked past me into the living room and collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I followed her in, sitting down across from her, not knowing what to say. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable, until she finally lifted her head and looked at me with eyes full of hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Why didn't you warn me, Mark?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words got stuck in my throat. How was I supposed to explain? How could I tell her that I had stayed silent because I wanted to hurt both of them? That I had even wanted to hurt her, for reasons I couldn't fully understand myself? "I don't know," I managed to say, knowing it wasn't nearly enough. "I just thought it was better this way." "Better?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You think this is better? My marriage is over, Mark." "David," she paused, her voice catching in her throat. "He ruined everything. And you knew. You could have told me. You could have stopped this before it got so bad." I felt like a complete jerk because she was right. I could have warned her, and I didn't. I let everything blow up in the worst possible way, just so I could have my twisted moment of revenge. I had betrayed her trust, used her as nothing more than a pawn, and now we were both left to deal with the aftermath. "Mary, I'm sorry," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I never meant for it to go this far. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. For a second, I thought she might lash out, finally say everything she'd been holding back. But instead, she just sighed and leaned back against the couch, her body slumping in exhaustion. "I don't even know what to feel anymore," she muttered. "Everything's just a mess." We sat there in silence again, the weight of everything we'd done hanging between us. She didn't blame me out loud, but I could feel it. Hell, I blamed myself too. And yet, despite all of it, the anger, the guilt, the pain, there was still something else lingering. Something that had been building between us for weeks, even before the dinner. A strange, twisted connection I couldn't quite ignore. It wasn't love, not really. It wasn't just lust, though that was certainly part of it. It was something darker, more complicated, like we were two broken people thrown into the same nightmare, clinging to each other because we had nowhere else to turn. Before I even realized what I was doing, I got up and moved to sit beside her on the couch. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. I could feel her trembling, like she was barely holding herself together. "I don't know what to do, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm drowning." I pulled her closer, wrapping my arm around her. "We'll figure it out," I replied, though I had no clue how. "We'll get through this." The conversation eventually faded into silence, leaving only the quiet hum of the night to fill the room. Her breathing slowed, and I almost thought she had drifted off to sleep. But then, out of nowhere, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with something unfamiliar, something dangerous. "Mark," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep doing this, can we?" I stared back at her, unsure of how to respond. But deep down, I understood exactly what she meant. She was talking about us, about this twisted, secret affair we'd been carrying on behind everyone's back. About how it couldn't continue without tearing apart what little was left of our lives. But instead of agreeing, instead of ending it right then and there like I should have, I did the one thing I knew I shouldn't. I kissed her. This kiss was different from the others. It wasn't fueled by anger or a thirst for revenge. It wasn't about reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. It was driven by need, pure desperation. A need to feel something, anything, that wasn't just pain. And Mary kissed me back, just as desperately, just as broken. Before I even realized it, we were tangled up on the couch, clothes being pulled off in a frenzy, our bodies pressed together as if trying to erase everything that had happened over the past few weeks. It was messy, raw. And when it was over, neither of us said a word. We just lay there in the darkness, breathing heavily, too drained to move. It wasn't until much later, after Mary had fallen asleep in my arms, that the full weight of what I'd done hit me. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. This wasn't about revenge anymore, this had become something else, something far more dangerous. And now, I was in too deep to find a way out. Lily was gone. David was nothing more than a ghost. And Mary? She was all I had left. But for how long? That question gnawed at me, keeping me up at night. The next few weeks blurred into a chaotic mix of guilt, confusion, and regret. Lily never returned. I didn't ask where she was, and truthfully, I didn't care. I had bigger issues to deal with. Mary kept her distance, which was probably for the best, but the few times we did talk, the tension was unbearable. We were both avoiding the inevitable, the fact that whatever we had between us was as doomed as our marriages. David tried reaching out a couple of times, unbelievable, really. After everything, he actually had the nerve to ask if we could meet up and talk things through. I didn't bother responding. What was there to say? He slept with my wife, wrecked his own marriage, and destroyed what we had as a family. There was nothing left to discuss. But here's the thing about revenge, it never ends where you think it will. I had thought I could control it, that I could get my satisfaction and then walk away unscathed. I was wrong. Revenge has a way of devouring you, bit by bit, until there's nothing left but the ruins. The first sign of that came when Mary stopped speaking to me altogether. At first, I figured she just needed some time to process everything, but as days turned into weeks, I realized something had shifted. She was shutting me out, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. I was the one who had dragged her into this mess. I was the one who had used her as a weapon to destroy her own husband. I thought we had found some sort of connection, something real. But it turned out to be just as broken as everything else. One night, after nearly a month of silence, my phone finally rang. It was Mary. Her voice sounded flat, drained of all emotion, like she was reading off a script. "Mark, I can't do this anymore," she said, and in that moment, I knew it was over. "Whatever this is, whatever we've been doing, it's not healthy. It's not right." I didn't try to argue. How could I? She was right. We'd both been spiraling, holding on to each other in a desperate attempt to feel anything besides the crushing weight of betrayal. But that wasn't enough, and it never could be. "I understand," I replied quietly. "I'm sorry, Mary." She didn't acknowledge the apology. Instead, she sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I need space, Mark. I need to figure out my life, and I can't do that with you in it." Her words stung more than I expected, but I didn't protest. I had already caused enough damage. "Take care of yourself," I said, and then the call ended. I sat there for a long while after that, staring blankly at my phone, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence almost suffocating. Lily was gone, David was out of the picture, and now Mary was too. I was alone, and for the first time in weeks, I had to confront the full extent of what I'd done. I thought back to everything that led me here, Lily's betrayal, David's smug face, the way they thought they could sneak around and get away with it. And yes, I got my revenge. I humiliated them, tore their lives apart just as they had done to mine. But sitting there in the quiet darkness of my house, a realization hit me that I hadn't been willing to face before. Revenge hadn't brought me any peace. It hadn't fixed a damn thing. If anything, it had left me feeling even more hollow and broken than before. A few days passed, and then I received an email from Lily, not a phone call, not a face-to-face conversation, just a cold, impersonal email. It was short and blunt. She wanted a divorce. There was no apology, no attempt to explain herself, she just wanted out. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. I wanted out too. Out of this nightmare we'd all been living in. The divorce process was quick, disturbingly so. Neither of us had the energy to fight over the house or the money. We split everything down the middle and went our separate ways. I didn't even see her during the final hearing. A few signatures, some legal jargon, and just like that, 10 years of marriage were gone in an instant. As for David and Mary, I didn't hear much about them afterward. Last I heard, Mary had moved to a different city, looking to start fresh far away from the wreckage we'd left behind. And David? Well, from what I gathered, his life continued to spiral out of control. His business was in ruins, and after everything came to light, no one wanted to work with him. Karma's a real bitch, I guess, but even that didn't bring me any satisfaction. None of it did. Revenge was supposed to be sweet, but all it left me with was an empty house and a hollow ache in my chest. I spent weeks trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out exactly where everything had gone wrong. But the truth was, none of that mattered. The damage was already done. One night, after I'd had more to drink than I should have, I found myself thinking about calling Mary. I picked up the phone, dialed her number, but then I hesitated. What was I even going to say? That I was sorry. That I missed her. That I wished there was some way to fix all the things that had been shattered. None of those words would change what had happened. And besides, she didn't need me making her life more complicated than I already had. So, I set the phone back down and walked out onto the porch, gazing into the quiet of the night. The air was cool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I experienced a strange kind of calm. It wasn't the peace I had chased with my need for revenge, nor the fleeting satisfaction of watching Lily and David's lives collapse. No, this was different. This was the kind of peace that comes with accepting the truth, that I couldn't change the past, that I couldn't undo the harm I had caused, no matter how much I might wish otherwise. It was time to move forward. To start fresh. I didn't have a clue where to begin, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by the ghosts of everything I'd lost. So, I made the decision to sell it. I packed up what was left of my life and left town. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, but I didn't need to. Anywhere was better than staying trapped in the ruins of my old life. It's been a few months since I made that move. I'm still piecing things together, still trying to make sense of everything that happened. Some nights, my thoughts drift back to Mary, to what could have been if we hadn't gotten caught up in our own mess. But I know better than to linger on it. It's done. It's all over now. I'm not the same man I was before all of this went down. I'm not sure if that's for better or worse, but it's the truth. Revenge didn't heal me, it didn't provide the closure I thought it would. If anything, it showed me just how far I could fall. But maybe that's exactly what I needed, to hit rock bottom, to lose everything, so I could finally figure out how to start over. So, here I am, starting from scratch. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I'm okay with that uncertainty. I'll figure it out, one day at a time. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find some real peace along the way.